Greetings, everybody. How you doing? This is Adrian. Hey, for Chapter 5, we have the book slides, which are pretty beastly. We have the truncated or shortened version with some annotations on there by me, but also I'm doing an audio-video component as well. So hopefully all three of these will help out. This is actually going to be a little bit shorter amount of slides than what you've seen before, so it's less. That's me squishing my head on the video. All right, here we go, guys. So we've talked about the shoulder blade and the actual shoulder girdle itself. If you recall, that's the actual shoulder blade sitting on the back of the thoracic portion of the body, and those guys articulate in a number of different ways, right? Up, down, forward, in, out, or when you protract and retract, right? Or they actually rotate. But here's the deal. The shoulder blade is part of the equation. The clavicle on the front side of the body is the other part of the equation. And then they come together at the shoulder or in the shoulder joint, which helps form the GH joint. So the GH joint is where the head of the humerus comes in and attaches right in and articulates in that joint itself. The only place that actually attaches anywhere on the body is up here at the manubrium. So you have the clavicle that comes around and attaches on the manubrium. So everything is kind of dependent upon this interconnected relationship between all the muscles and this one pivot point that is the clavicle. I'm going to breeze through this stuff because we'll talk a little bit about it later on, but also with this, it's kind of self-evident, right? You're going to have a pretty easy understanding of, hey, this is a very mobile joint, which makes it less stable. And you know that because there's only one area where the dang shoulder girdle and the shoulder itself is attached structurally up front, that makes it very mobile, but it also gives it a heightened risk of injury. The biggies I want you to look at and understand are the head of the humerus, the greater tubercle, and the lesser tubercle. Everything else is kind of secondary except for this, the deltoid tuberosity, because the deltoid tuberosity is where several of the muscles all kind of come down into a point and attach on the side of the humerus and allow the humerus to abduct from the body. So the biggies to pay attention to, the head, the greater tubercle, lesser tubercle. This guy, a little bit, but the biggie is the deltoid tuberosity. So as we talked about, you have the shoulder blade, the head of the humerus, here's the GH joint, that's a glenoid cavity right there, and then you have the clavicle, and the clavicle attaches out here on the manubrium to the sternum. So when you look at this, and you look at the actual shoulder joint itself, you know this from when we talked about bones before, it's rounded like a globe, rounded like the earth, and a toroidal type of joint, which this is the most easily manipulated joint in the body. The biggie I want to get across is, as practitioners, is realize you have a number of different connective tissue that cross that joint. So if you can imagine, I'm standing here and it looks like this with the fibers running east-west, if you will, medial to lateral. But as soon as I do this and then I externally rotate, you can think of what's happening to that, almost like a dish rag. If you take a dish rag like you'd have and you twist it, you're taking those fibers and twisting that. And what you'll see is this. If you look at these as like the fibers that are on the screen running medial to lateral, as soon as you go ahead and do this and twist and rotate, you're twisting those fibers. But if you notice, it's subtle, but my knuckles on my fingers there, as I rotate, they're actually coming closer together because as I rotate this, it closes the distance of the fibers. So as I rotate and go into external rotation, any type of external rotation, the connective tissue seen here actually does this. And the terminology you'll hear later on will be closed pack position, but keep in mind any overhead type of movements, you're externally rotating, you're taking those fibers and you're doing this to them and you're actually tightening up that shoulder joint. Moving on. Different injuries, we'll get into this a little bit later on. I will touch a little bit on just the common ones you'll see. But just realize these are part of the equation. The issue you have with the rotator cuff is it's inherently unstable, and the rotator cuff is part of, or is comprised of 4 muscles that are part of a group that all work together synergistically to keep the shoulder together and keep the humeral head in the right position when doing an exercise. And they all kind of work in balance. So if you have an injury to one, for example, you'll have an offloading of work to the others, meaning the other muscles. So what I did was I took the slides and I broke them out for you guys on this, and you'll see this in the uploaded presentation itself. But I put together abduction. You know that that is abducting the arm. It's coming up away from the body. And primarily the supraspinatus and the deltoid are using that. Now the supraspinatus, you know, is the top half of the posterior side of the scapula. But the thing is that supraspinatus is used in approximately the first 15 degrees of movement of abduction. And then the deltoid takes over, and the deltoid comes down and attaches on the deltoid tuberosity. So I make it a point to highlight the tuberosity because it's so important in terms of how that deltoid comes down and attaches. Now, if we're able to get this guy working here, we'll play this, you'll see out and up. We'll do it again. Out and up you go, boom. So you're taking the arm up and away from the side of the body in abduction. Now, adduction is exactly the opposite. And adduction is a downward movement, and gravity actually helps us with this, but in that downward movement, you'll see teres major. Teres major is pictured on this, and actually teres major is also an internal rotator. And that's just the exact opposite movement of what we did before. Went from arms up to arms down. Arms up position to arms down. Nothing to it. With flexion, and you look at flexion of the shoulder, it's the anterior fibers of the deltoid and the coracobrachialis. And you think of in terms of what that coracobrachialis is, well, brachialis, you know the brachial region, right? You know the coracoid process up here. So anatomically, the name describes itself. And so that movement of flexion, if I can stand to the side, is if I put a bullet point through my shoulder and I'm moving up and forward in sagittal plane, that would be shoulder flexion. Let's play this guy right here. Up you go. Go ahead, we'll move on. I want to take a bunch of time. Extension is just the opposite, right? So you're coming from an up position and down towards the floor. Now in that extension, realize you're using a couple different muscles like we're talking about now. It's not like it's one muscle group that does each particular movement. But in extension, latissimus dorsi as well as teres major are used in extension. And you're also seeing that teres major, please note the difference between teres major and teres minor. Teres major internally rotates, where teres minor externally rotates. Boop, there it goes. Got it. Horizontal adduction, sometimes referred to as transverse flexion, very much a chest type movement. So you have the pectoralis, starts on the sternum, across the ribs, out here on the humerus, and that's also used in adduction and some internal rotation. So think about now what's going on. We just talked about the lats being involved in shoulder, if I go back one here, are used in the shoulder extension movement pattern. We're bringing the arms down. They're also used in internal rotation. And this is almost not intuitive sometimes for people, but you got to realize lats are used in internal rotation and the pecs are used in internal rotation. And many times people think they're completely antagonistic, but if you look at this and think of in terms of shoulder flexion to extension type movement pattern, you are using lats and you are using chest at the same time. Well, let's move on to the next one. We're already 8 minutes in, 9 minutes in. Horizontal adduction and then horizontal abduction, going away from the center of the body, going outward. Let that one play for you. And that, okay, with external rotation. Here's where it gets kind of funky with teres. You have the rotator cuff group has 4 muscles involved with it, and the acronym for that is SITS, S-I-T-S. And teres minor is part of the rotator cuff group. Teres major is not. You have external rotation. All you're doing is just rotating outward against the band. That's it. And then internal rotation is just the opposite. Boop. In the midline of the body, more subscapularis. So you'll notice with the rotator cuff group, you have SITS. Subscapularis is one of the SITS. And with subscap, that is the only internal rotator of the rotator cuff group. So please keep that in mind as we go forward. And I also put in the diagonal abduction adduction. When you do diagonal ab and adduction, it's a synergistic firing of multiple muscle groups. And so you may recall this kind of force coupling idea. And so in a PNF pattern, where you have PNF is a proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation movement pattern seen in physical therapy, you're moving cross-body, multi-plane, and working on diagonal abduction and adduction as you internally and externally rotate the humerus in the GH joint. Very common movement pattern done in the physical therapy environment. I like doing it as part of a warm-up myself. So I'm leaving this up here for you guys for a second just to kind of take a peek, and this will be up for your review later on, but please understand the intrinsic and extrinsic GH muscles. Right. Also loaded up this with the slides, and you know that the anterior muscles involved in the shoulder, any kind of shoulder movement, would be pecs, coracobrachialis, subscapularis. Superior would be deltoid and supraspinatus, right? So you have the anterior muscles, so superior muscles, the posterior muscles, including latissimus dorsi, teres, infraspinatus, teres minor. And then when you look at this, I tried to put these guys together so you have a better understanding of here is the muscle itself, latissimus dorsi. It's used in extension and adduction and also internal rotation of the humerus. I'll kind of zip through these real quick. I do make it a point, though, to note the difference in yellow here when you have this internal rotation, right, of teres major. You see how it originates on the border of the scapula, comes in, it's used in internally rotating the arm. Whereas when you get into the rotator cuff group, you have supraspinatus above the spine of the scapula, the infraspinatus below the spine of the scapula, and then you get into teres minor. Teres minor is used in externally rotating. The only one it's used in internal rotation of the rotator cuff group is the muscle called subscapularis, sub being on the underside of the scapula. It's actually in between the scapula and the thoracic area of the rib cage, and it's used in internally rotating the humerus in harmony or conjunction with the pec as well as lat. Cranking through. The biggie about the rotator cuff group, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, you have slap tear, superior labrum anterior posterior. The material that wraps around the GH joint helps hold the humerus in place, is a type of material that is oftentimes torn from the glenoid fossa. And then you also have a tear of the supraspinatus muscle because that bad boy is used in the first 15 degrees of movement of abduction. So often you see injuries where you have people who reach for something behind the front seat, the passenger seat of the car. Maybe perhaps it's a bag full of bricks or something, and they go to pick that up and it's an anatomically weak position with a long lever, and that supraspinatus just tears. And usually there's some type of co-issue that happens where you have a proximal tear of the bicep tendon up in the shoulder in conjunction with one of these. Those are the big ones that I always see. I also put this in here just for the rest of the muscles involved in the rotator cuff. Sorry about that, spacing out, looking at the time we have left. And when you look at supraspinatus, you know it's above the spine of the scapula. You have infraspinatus, it's below the spine of the scapula, and also you have the actual movement itself, so you have that reinforced here. And then teres minor again in yellow, so you know the difference, right? So teres minor is out here, and it's used in externally rotating the GH joint. Got it, guys? I also put in the agonist for each one. So for flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, and then you have horizontal abduction. Okay? And with the diagonal abduction, you're going to have a ton of different muscles all working together for both of those. The biggie with the nerves is you got to understand it comes out of C5, or the cervical area, and there is, as I mentioned, an understanding where if you have an issue down a nerve root, like we saw in class with one of the students where we had them lay down, they had an issue down the arm, and actually that could happen up here in the plexus where there's some type of injury. I got about 15 seconds left to go, and so I got to go. You guys have a good one, and look forward to Chapter 6. Thanks. Bye.